I'm not camera ready. Got this mark on my face. Makeup. Hey friends, welcome to the Fireside. My name is Jake, so happy to have you here. Today, I've got a great show with my buddy Cooper. It's always such a fun conversation with him. Every time I talk to him, I learn a lot. He is a deep diver on all kinds of stuff. Technical stuff, artistic stuff, all kinds of tattoo stuff. So this episode, like every episode we've done with Cooper, is going to be packed full of information. Make sure to have a pencil and a piece of paper, or maybe a digital writing tablet or something like that, because you'll want to take notes. I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm just going to get to the episode right now. Thank you for supporting what we do. I'll see you at the end.
You know, I was thinking whenever we were setting up, and then as you just mentioned, the crafting the feel of your studio and the aromas. We've been doing this show for 10 years now, and I've talked to a lot of people. I've talked to people who are really awesome, like technicians who are really dialed in on gear and supplies, who are really dialed in on art or business or whatever. But I can't think of anyone else who is as dialed in on all of those things equally as you are. When it comes down to like from process, like we had a talk just last week, just on the phone preparing for this, and you have been running machines all day, trying to figure out like cycles per second on
stuff I'm testing here. I'll tell you about that in a minute if you want. Yeah, absolutely, man.
So maybe that's a way to kind of start this conversation, is like just a day in the life. You know what I'm saying? Like how people kind of dial into the thing that they're into. Some people are like, if I have a conversation with Nick Baxter, it's going to be drawing focused 100% of the time. Painting, drawing, art focused. If I have a talk with Ty Pilata or Carson Hill, it's going to be 100% machine focused. If I have a talk with you, you can speak at the level of all of those guys, but on all of those topics.
And that's actually some of what I wanted to talk about today. So it is a good way in. And it's mostly about being well-rounded, or the ways in which it's helpful. Speaking of which, basically attention to detail is my superpower, and according to some of the people I've worked with, probably my most annoying quality. So it really depends on what you want to get out of that. But yeah, speaking of that, I'm going to fix that camera because it's sinking down. It's going to drive me nuts.
Okay.
Obsessive attention to detail has kind of always been my thing, and it can be your superpower if you know how to put it to use. And it's, to some degree, always been part of my personality. To some degree, very much not. I'm your kind of classic neurodivergent, ADD, undiagnosed student that when hyper-focusing on the right thing, I can see more and more in-depth of it than most people can. And then other important things, I kind of just fuck off, which I think most of us can identify with. It's just way more extreme. So that's part of why I'm so methodical now, because it's the only way I've learned to be successful is by, in the cases where it's very much not something I want to do, making myself take those steps, learning the discipline, at least in those areas, learning to recognize the areas where I need to, and being well-rounded, at least well-rounded where it's worth being well-rounded. You don't have to know all things about everything, but, pay attention, figure out where the important parts are, and then really put the work into them,
Yeah. Is it that you're just curious about all of those things, or do you feel like you're obsessive over a lot of those things? Like, do you enjoy it, or do you just have to do it?
Well, I mean, I'm obsessive because I'm so curious. I feel like when I get curious about something, it tends to be overwhelming by a lot of people's standards, how deeply into it I get. So, so it's kind of both, but, it's one of those things you have to learn when to turn it off, and when it's okay to indulge that, So that's been my struggle. I don't know that most people, really identify too strongly with that. I know most of the people I've worked with don't understand that well. And so a lot of them will find it really annoying, but then ultimately also come to me when they need help with art and help with their machines and help with how to get their clients to understand and get on board with what they want to do. And, all the things all the way around. So it's, it can be a useful quality for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
If not always popular. One of the things I like to start, I've done a couple seminars recently, and one of my favorite ways to start it is, do you know the Growlers music? I don't know. It's a band I love, but one of my favorite songs of them, one of their lines is, nothing's as depressing as good advice. and that seems to be a key for that. So I try to really get people into the mindset of, okay, what are you going to do when me or anybody else gives you good advice that you emotionally or due to your ego or just comfort level want to say, no, fuck it, that doesn't matter. I'm not going to do that. That's more than I want to bother with. Are you going to come around? Are you going to chase that down? Or are you just going to pat yourself on the back and be like, yeah, I was cooler than that and I ignored it and now I'm moving on. I think that moment, that fork in the road is really key to what I wanted to talk about today, which a lot of it is really focusing on scrutiny, really. It's not, I don't know if that's the best word for it, but it seems fitting because it seems to be the crossroads. I know people come to you a lot and they ask me a lot on how do I do this or how do I develop more of a style? How do I get more efficient at this? And that is the crossroads to all of those things. That's the point where they all meet. So, some of the kind of repetitive to the point of being cliche advice that we keep giving on some of these podcasts is that, the last 10% makes 100% of the difference. You got to do an extra 30 to 50%. It's some form of basically saying time equals quality. More time equals better quality, that kind of thing. And so the people who actually want to take that in, they go to that fork in the road and they actually want to do something about that. They don't always know, okay, well, where's the first step? How do we actually start? Where's the actionable moment that I can actually take home and apply today? And it is, unfortunately, a lot of things that, just like that quote, it's going to be a little depressing at first. You got to understand that's the first step, is being willing to look at everything and go, that wasn't as good as I thought. I kind of feel like shit about that. And being okay with sitting with that, take it in, notice, it's not you, it's just where you were at the moment, a thing that happened at the moment, and then not let it own you so that you can learn to take action and move on. Or you can go the cool guy route, which is where tattooing had been for the last 30, 40 years. For the most part, is everybody's just too cool to worry about that. Man, fuck it. You don't need that shit. The lines are supposed to be bad. They're going to fall apart. Tattoos are supposed to be terrible. What are you talking about? Like the fucketeers, everything's fuck it this, fuck it that. And unfortunately, this other way, it's a lot of detail. It's a lot of learning, and it's boring, and it's you have to care a lot, and caring about stuff deeply is not cool. Right. It doesn't always make you feel good right away. It will hard. Later. Yeah. But yeah, if you're somebody who actually cares a lot about this, it means you're going to have to deal with a lot of those feelings and a lot of changing the way you do things. So I think it's recognizing, if you can get people to be okay with scrutiny, get to know the difference between being destructively negative about something and then, scrutiny where you can actually pull something positive out of it and an actionable step forward and that kind of thing, knowing where that crossroads is and, hopefully leaning to the right direction. Or even if you don't, at least you know why. At least you know what happened. So that was a little bit of where I want to start. I don't know if you're ready to dive in.
Absolutely, and I love that topic. I honestly didn't know that that's where we were going, but I'm thrilled with it because I've got a few ideas on it too, and I'm curious about your opinion. I wonder, because like you, I get a lot of these same types of questions, and my thought is that a lot of people ask questions to not to learn anything new or not to make any changes, but just either to voice their, I don't want to say concern, complaint, voice their complaints because they feel better getting it off their chests, while they're not really looking more so much for a solution. They're looking more just to be able to say,
they're just venting their frustration with how that is at the moment. Yeah, exactly. And that's, I've definitely struggled with that. And when I have done some seminars, especially smaller ones, weirdly, larger ones, people are more receptive. Smaller ones, people get more involved and a little more defensive and argumentative, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
So I was listening to a podcast recently, and there is a type of teaching that they're trying to implement in some schools. There are actually schools that are built around it, and I'm going to draw a blank on what it's called, but it's a way where these teachers are trained to never offer a solution. They only ask questions. The idea being that you're drawing out solutions from the person that they will actually use. And I'm incredibly curious about it because it sounds like it could be really effective.
That's kind of the same idea. It's you'll see teasings of that in some Buddhist philosophy. And I won't get too much into that stuff, but it really is more about teaching people how, or really how to ask how to ask why. You know, it's not so much the answer. It's like, okay, well, you have the question. That's the good part. That's the important part. And so like when people come to you with that other thing, like you're saying, they're just venting. I used to get frustrated at that because I'd give them an answer and then usually they would barely listen, if at all. And then they just get frustrated, not do anything about it, go back to doing the same thing and then be frustrated again later because nothing changed. And I found that frustrating, but that was sort of, you know, me not listening to them, I guess, in a way too, because even though they're saying that with their words, they're telling you otherwise. Oh, I'm just frustrated. I'm venting my frustration. I'm loosely dancing around the idea of this being a solidified question in my head. Then once I recognize what that is, then I can figure out, what do I do about it? How? Who do I talk to? Where's a good direction to go to when I don't know what to do? And that's where I think it's more important when we're teaching or giving people ideas, that it helps us and it helps them more to connect those dots. And that way we're not giving anything away. We're not putting expectations on them of any specific results of anything, which can also be more pressure and stress for them. But it helps them come to the answers on their own, which ultimately means way more. You know, everything you learn for yourself, you know, you kind of learn the hard way, you learn it the best way. But, you know, the thing about that too is with some guidance, you can still learn it the hard way and the best way, but you don't have to, you know, hit every single bump in the road as hard as you would otherwise. You know, you might not have to try something 15 times every way to figure out, oh, this one way kind of works. With a little guidance, you know, you might just try that 2 or 3 times. You find it, you still found it on your own. It's more valuable. And then you spend more of your time moving forward and getting things done and feeling better about yourself. So that's similar to the approach I definitely like. So it's more talking things through. And that's why I know we spoke earlier about doing a seminar or 2 at the upcoming event. And
Paradise,
at the Paradise. And I like that idea, but I would rather do workshops for that reason. I feel like a smaller group of people, even if it's not always as effective, in some ways it is, because you can kind of talk to people and connect with them a little more and figure out, okay, well, how can we figure out how to get you to bridge those gaps and recognize the points along that? And, you know, I feel like even if you were to tell people the exact same stuff, they're going to come away with a lot more, especially if one of the ones I would want to do is, you know, kind of complex problem solving and all the methodology kind of stuff like this. But another one is just black and gray. Just, you know, a lot of people haven't learned at least some of the ways I know how to do black and gray. So you get a chance to maybe do it, hear about it, problem solve on your own a little bit. In the same way I would try to teach people a few basic marks and let them work their way through it, and I can help them. But having actual, you know, time to physically do it. You know, we get a couple of machines set up and some fake skin, even though that stuff is really so different from actual skin. It's borderline not helpful sometimes, but it would still be a chance for them to practice certain things. And I think it would really be a first step in a really good direction for a lot of people. So
I love that. The thing, so this is for people, we haven't pitched this much yet. So, but we're putting on for people who remember the Paradise gatherings, the Paradise kind of art retreats. We're doing one of those in October, and Cooper and I were talking about you teaching a workshop or maybe multiple workshops. Or I approached you about a seminar, and you said I would rather do something hands-on like a workshop. And as soon as we started talking about it, a light bulb went off for me, because the thing that I've been struggling with that whole concept is I don't want it to feel like I've gone to the Worldwide Conference and I know Explorer is doing great things, and you go and you sit in a room and people come in front of you and they tell you all their ideas and you end up overwhelmed with information and you don't really know what to apply. And so you have kind of analysis paralysis and things like that. And so whenever you started bringing up the idea of doing, you know, limiting the size, smaller groups, hands-on, you know, in an environment that's really inspiring, where people trust each other and you're not trying to like prove that you know what you're doing. I think that's the biggest thing to me. I don't want people to feel standoffish, like they have to prove that they already know how to draw or already know how to tattoo, or they want to impress you because they follow you on Instagram and they like you and or whatever. I don't know the best way to break that down, but it seems to me that your approach of, well, here, if you want to like get these, you know, solid fields of mid-tone gray, I'm happy to help you, and this is the way to
Yeah,
do it.
and
That
a lot of
feels
it's
like
about
the way that you might break those barriers down.
definitely, yeah, and I think a lot of it's about learning different texture control because that's a big part of that is not just learning to perform different textures, but training your eye to know what you need to put in for, like, say, what tone and texture you need, how to get it, how to make those play with each other, and then big, flat, smooth fields of gray wash are great, but that's just one of several textures. Smooth is a texture. There's also certain kinds of roughness. You can get stuff that looks like cloth. Some, obviously people are doing a lot of stipple and pattern based stuff now, which is great. So learning how and where to apply those in the most effective way. And that would be the other seminars, effective layering, because that's something more people are finally starting to play with. I feel like there are some, I wouldn't say ethical issues with it, but there are some very practical issues with layering. So I think having some guidance from the start to let people know basically, okay, here's a way to do it effectively and keep it efficient and, make it still where you come in on budget, you're getting the effects you want, and, you're getting something that'll last, because that's one of the many things that I do. Everything I'm focused on, my bulletproof, I sort of call it style that I apply things with, is very much focused on not just making a good, very technically clean tattoo, but it's about aging. A very good tattoo should last, more than 30 years. The bare minimum should be 30 years. Most people, they're just not thinking that far out, and that's one of the things with the methodology and with the management, the tactics, this, strategy, whatever you want to call that whole section of tattooing that kind of gets ignored, is learning to manage that, I guess, specifically. Speaking of which, I'll send you a better, I have a little cheap digital infographics, but a little bit of stuff about the way I learned about tattooing is, it's kind of, basic Venn diagram. See, and it's, the top part is art, and that's where, most clients see it from the outside looking in. The second circle is craftsmanship. That's where I think most artists eventually, getting 4 or 5 to even 10 or 15 years in, people usually spend more time focusing on that, because after that amount of time, you've had enough clients come back with stuff that you've had to redo or has healed messed up or just didn't do the thing you thought it was going to do. So learning to be well-rounded in craftsmanship is good. And then once you get past like 10, 15, 20 years, you start doing large-scale stuff and things become overwhelming, almost unmanageable in so many aspects. How to deal with the clients, how to deal with the schedule, how to deal with arranging your art so that you're basically not putting just ridiculous amounts of time in, but you're also not doing the cool guy thing, which is, oh, fuck it, man. It's just supposed to be shitty. And we're just, I'll just do a whole sleeve in 8.5 hours. And who cares if this whole thing's a scratchy field of something that's going to look like dog shit in 5 years. Like that. We don't want to go that route either. Or at least, who knows? Maybe somebody does. I don't want to go that route. And I don't think most people want to go that route. And if they don't, they should be able to know how. So I've got that broken down a lot more too. And that'll be another part of that seminar if we get into management and tactics. But it gives people exact stuff. It gives people specifics on, okay, well, we break it down to the 3 main areas, the whole thing's not so overwhelming. And now I can just focus on this one area. Okay, that's an area I never really thought too much about. If I put more time in, I can develop that. And developing one little arm of each of those areas at a time is a really good, really actionable way to get a lot of personal and professional growth, without just having to, again, be in that same spot where I think a lot of young and intermediate artists are. It's like, I want to be better. Through sheer force of will, I want to be better, but there's no real exact way forward. And, we're in this weird spot where tattooing has blown up so much. It's grown so fast. So many young artists coming in, which I think, like most older tattooers, I'm kind of on the opposite side, I guess, of most older generation tattooers. I'm kind of caught in the middle. I really love the new wave of tattooers. I don't feel like all the old cliches are really that justified. People, they don't know how to pull a solid line. They're all using pen machines that aren't worth shit. All the cliche stuff, I honestly don't think is that true. I'm actually seeing more people doing not just more creative art, more interesting art, but a lot of times much more technically sound. With all the new stuff that's come up, to some degree, cartridges. I have some issues with them still, but pen machines and a lot of the new equipment coming up has made it where it leveled the field a lot more. You know, it used to be if you're looking at a scale of 1 to 10, 5 being average for tattooers or each tattoo that's done, it was really hard as a new tattooer to get anything, you know, even up to the 5 mark. You know, you're like, oh my God, I didn't fuck things up today. It took you, you know, when we first started using coil machines that just did whatever the fuck they wanted to every day. You know, we had a great day if like, oh my God, I did 4 tattoos and there wasn't a fucked up thing about any of them. Like, you're not even worried about doing a cool tattoo. You're like, I didn't fuck up. That was awesome. You know? And that, because the new equipment has changed a lot and it's kind of compressed to the middle of that spectrum a lot. And there is a huge amount of people that are coming in sooner, faster, easier, being able to get to that middle area. But because of the same restraints, also in some ways, it's kind of brought the top end of that further out of reach for a lot of people. You know, cartridges and rotaries in particular, they're great. They really help raise the bar, but they also changed the amount of really just the elements. If you broke down tattoos and art, what's popular now, it's not just style. A lot of it comes down to what the machines that people have available perform easier. You know, buttery, smooth blends and solid fields and, you know, grays and, you know, mostly color packing and blending in that medium speed range from machines. They do really, really well, regardless of what you're using. And cartridges, especially with mags, they do really well with that stuff. When you get to really fine black and gray, it kind of gets a little more out of reach. When you do really good line work, which used to be like when we first started, you know, 25 years or something for you, is that right? 25 or so years ago, like
96 from 27 next
wow
month.
Okay, so yeah, you're a lot further ahead than I am even. The line work was everything. It was the test of everything, and to me it still in many ways is, but a lot of the newer generations don't see that. And because we found ways to do, and you know, with Instagram and other stuff, TikTok, people looking at different things for art, they're seeing art styles that don't really need that, you know, so they're not really understanding the need for good line work until they get to, again, that, you know, 10, 15 year mark down the line. They're like, oh my God, my old tattoos look like shit. They didn't hold together. The lines are barely there, or they don't connect at the ends or any of that stuff. Hopefully they'll eventually come around, but that, because of what we're using, it's really hard to reach that 8, 9, 10, that high mark of really good craftsmanship. Just because these rotary machines, they have a hard time reaching that last little bit. A big part of that, even though I'm sitting here with, you know, some wand machines in front of me with stuff we've been testing, a big part of that is the rotary, but the bigger part of it, I'm convinced now, especially after some of the new ones that are coming out with new brushless motors that are really good, is just the cartridge itself. It's both genius and very flawed. And like, until somebody can sort of solve that, I feel like a lot of us kind of have to just make do with things being not as great as they could be. And unfortunately, that means even tattooers who really know how to get good lines and value those things, they understand the why of it, not just the how. It's even further out of reach for those guys now, because the entire landscape is pushing towards those machines. I'm you know, keeping my fingers crossed. I'm hoping that that's going to come around, and that I don't know. I've been messing with the Bishop wand here. Been testing that one a lot. That's my new one. I usually test a new machine for about 6 months to a year. Try to see, I don't know, every possible angle of what we can on something. All the yield results. All at all the important timelines.
Which wand are you testing? The packer, the liner?
The liner first, because that's with most machines. That's the high water mark for any machine. You know, it always was for coils, and it still seems to be for most of these. It seems like, I would guess any machine builder, probably 90% of the people, the requests they get from machines are saying, you know what, my machines are all pretty good, but I just need something that puts in 11s to 18s really good, really easy, really smooth. And that's the unicorn that everybody's been chasing. That's why I have a drawer full of 30, 40, maybe even 50 tattoo machines, almost all of which were bought to be like, oh, this will be the one. This will be the one that will do, you know, really good, really high quality lines without a lot of problems.
Is your real unit of measure, is it pen, is it the cartridge itself or just rotary machines in general? Because there are, rotaries like the Sidewinder of Dan Cuban is the first one that pops in my mind, because it really, to me, hits like, for a liner, hits like a perfectly tuned coil machine.
Very much, yeah. And that's why, like, every time I get a new machine or new anything in my hands, I do, here, I can show you how over the top. I don't know anybody who's more meticulous at testing than me. As I do with all my clients, I keep track of everything so it's consistent. So every session, all the stuff we keep track of, what machine, what voltage it was at, what the throw is, the speed, the hand speed, cadence, what ink I was using, every last thing for all of them, so I can recreate it consistently. And when I test, I do that for a minimum of 6 months, but I like to get at least a year before I feel like anything's properly tested. But I have the same stuff in mind that I've had for really for everything in tattooing. I mean, if we're going to teach, younger tattooers or people who just don't know yet how to really train their eye to look for better quality. That's a big part of the topic on that management one for me, is learning how to train your eye. And a lot of it has to do with thinking about and trying to see every mark you make, every tattoo you do, as not what it is now, what is it at every benchmark. Meaning there's when you first do it, there's when it's first healed, there's a month later, there's, after the month, there's that sort of fool's gold layer of the skin. And that takes about 6 to 9 months to fall out. It like basically it heals in and it looks fine. There's a lot of people who do a lot of really light brushing, and especially with like fine line, single needle stuff where people are barely peppering things in there. Everything will fall apart. It'll look great even, mostly right away, but after a year, it'll really change a lot again. And that's because that fool's gold layer of skin finally grew out the top. It healed everything in, but it was still, those cells were on their way out. And then that's when, that's the first thing I look at for a machine. That's what I want to see a year. So I try not to change a single thing during that time. And I'm in a unique position for this because I'm doing more than most people. My layered stuff is longer term. It's all large scale work. So I'm seeing almost everybody for longer periods of time, than a year. So I can see if if the character changes, if what happens most of the time with rotaries, with certain kinds of rotaries. It used to be most rotaries. Now it's actually only some rotaries. Was that, I would even call it the rotary line, where it goes in easy. The client loves it. That's another big part I do too, is I always test for the clients, like, okay, how did it heal and how did it feel when we do it? I'll do 2 or 3 machines side by side. The standard ones, I know how they work. If I'm getting reliable use out of them, then this one, set them up with the same liner, same everything, and I'll do, I'll keep track of the whole outline. Be like, okay, we did the lower third of it with this machine, the middle third with this machine, the upper third with that machine, see how they look when they heal, and the client tells me, how did it feel? When I change machines, when I change speeds, when I changed anything on it, I'll let them know, and like, does it feel different? Does it seem different? I'll look for the redness of the skin. Is it reacting or bleeding more? Any of that stuff. But a lot of them would get that rotary line where it feels good going in. It's fast. It's easy. It looks really crisp. And then for the weaker ones, it would even be 2 to 3 hours into the session. I'll look back at what seemed to be a good saturated line, and I can already see those little rake marks, the ghosting through it. You know what I mean? And the saturation wasn't there. And I don't know if it was the depth. I don't know if the ink's just not getting in. One reason or another, the ink isn't getting the proper layer of the skin. And a lot of the even tougher to spot ones would be the kind of, I would say up to about 3 or 4 years ago, it was almost all of them, would be where people are lining with them. Even large ones would finally start putting in 11s and 14s pretty well. And then, it wasn't till that full year later, people come back and I'm like, that looks like a dark gray line, that ghosted at the edge. I can see where it whipped out. And some of that is definitely going to be technique. Who knows? I certainly don't want people to think that I'm, the perfect technical tattooer or anything. I mean, I focus a lot more than most people do, but like anybody, I have my flaws. I have my off days. I might have missed a part of something here and there. So there's always some of that. But if I start to see consistencies over, 6 months, a year of me doing that, then I can pretty well say for sure that's the character of this machine. Here's when we tried to change every little thing every way, and we still got the same results, or we didn't. So I did that with Cubans. Started with coils. That's how I learned to test new coils, because coils are so unpredictable sometimes. And I got to where I was using Cubans mostly. I really don't. Yeah, I always think of myself as somebody who still uses coils to line for whatever reason, but it's actually pretty rare. I really only have a couple of groupings and stuff that I'll do that with, and it's mostly Cubans. They tend to be the daily driver. I'm testing Vlad Blad right now, which I feel like is it's a pretty good comparison. The last ones I just got through, or kind of on the tail end of testing, is sorry, I'm just holding up the grip here. The Bishop Wand liner, but it is usually the liners, yeah, that I'm testing, because it's also the entire range of what they either can or can't do is never more apparent than it is with lines. Solid coloring, you can see artifacts, you can see changes. Also, a lot more reasons why that could be different. But a line can and does do the same job, but it's so much more apparent if there's a little break, if there's a wiggle, if there's a light spot, if there's a blowout. Especially when it heals out later, there's no possible way you can think that every little one of those was a mistake if you're seeing it all the time. You know what I mean? Or just missing it.
Yeah, you're really limiting the variables with the line. So with a shader, you're covering a big area, or you're packing color, or you're trying to.
People have stretch marks or reactions, yeah.
Yeah, that mean you can easily change your hand speed, the angle of entry could change, your focus, your attention. But if you're just going from here to here, you're making your A to B, A to B, A to B in a line. You're a lot more consistent. And you're limiting those variables quite a bit. I'm
also lucky in that most of the big stuff that I do, the way I do gray lines for the start, is even yet, I think, a degree beyond that, like better for testing, because I know the exact pitch that the gray line is intended to be, because I use the same wash, the same setup for all of them. And so if I see any variations, you're going to see some change from body part to body part, that get around the elbow or the collarbone, the depth of skin changes. You're obviously going to see some changes there. But if I can see something throughout, then I know that it is an equipment issue, because that's literally the only thing that changed throughout. And it's the same thing I've been doing for over a decade now. So, yeah, so that I think is the easiest one for me to test. I've been using the Bishop Wand here for I think about 4 or 5 months now. And I did not expect to like it as much as I do. It's still, no machine is perfect. There's always something somewhere, but I've actually found that it's worked its way comfortably into my rotation for a lot of stuff, a lot more than I thought it would. And I know we talked a little bit about, the Numas. I love the ideas that Carson's doing. Those machines were just not my flavor. It just wasn't working for me. Even though I did a lot of extensive testing with those too. I kind of expected these to be similar, where they were definitely doing better. Like, I don't want to knock anything that Carson's doing in any way. It was notably better than almost any rotary, especially pen style rotary, that I'd messed with before, other than the Cuban.
Hey, sorry to interrupt mid-episode, but I wanted to take a quick minute and let you know about the Paradise Tattoo Gathering, which we mentioned in this actual episode. The Paradise Tattoo Gathering this year will be held October 12th through the 15th at Jiminy Peak, Massachusetts, Jiminy Peak Mountain Resort in Massachusetts. It is a beautiful spot. Tons of great presenters. Cooper is going to be one of those, going to be teaching a workshop there. My buddy Andy Chambers is going to be there. A lot of other people, Howie Tattoos, I'll be teaching. Lots of folks. And so we would love for you to come out and join us. There'll be tattooing, there'll be painting, drawing, hiking if you want to do that. It's really a beautiful, beautiful spot. So I'll leave a link to the Paradise Tattoo Gathering. Go ahead and get your tickets and get prepared to come out in October. Looking forward to seeing you. Let's get back to the episode.
I agree with and I'm using now his newest one, the Macro, which is a bigger, torquier motor. And he said, you might want to use this one with larger configurations. But I find myself lining with 7, liners with it with the 20%. And to me, I'm running it at like, I don't personally have a really fast hand speed. I'm pretty methodical in the way that I move my hands. But I'm using it with 7 liners, and I've not found anything a pen style machine that lines like that like Carson's.
I've got to try that one. See, that was the problem, is I did like over the top extensive testing. I talked to him briefly, and even was like, "Oh, I have these results for you." And then I went and got the Muso Toku, and I was trying. It's like, oh man, I did some of this with a different power unit. I changed one of the things without realizing. It's like, okay, I got to finish another full round of testing with that to make sure that that didn't change anything. And ultimately kind of came up with the same stuff. It is good, but it wasn't enough to where it made me want to stop using Cubans instead. Although I spent a lot of time fighting with the Cubans. I'm not going to lie. They are, it's like having a Formula racer. You know what I mean? The thing works great, but goddamn it wants to break down or do something weird on you every chance it gets. It's not as bad as a coil, but it really is, in that sense, much more like a coil too. Like I have to be on top of all the little things, staying in tune. It's on any given day, it may decide it's just gonna spit like crazy and do some weird shit, and I just got to deal with it. But that's all right. Like I deal with that. It's, all machines are imperfect, and I think that's one thing that kind of gets lost with a lot of the newer generations too, is that they expect everything to work easy all the time. And, I don't need to go on a rant about us old tattooers and how hard we had it and all this kind of stuff. But there was something to the ingenuity that we had to have. Like we would basically be given a drawer full of half-working machines some days, and the owner would leave, and there's a line of people out the door, and they're like, you got to make money. You got to make magic happen. That machine's not working. Figure it out. Make something up. Make it work. If it's not working right, who cares? It still worked. Do what you need to do and make the magic happen, So it's coming from that standpoint, when I'm talking about this machine and any of the things that are imperfect about it, or a Cuban or the Numa or any of those, I mean, I am nitpicking. I am splitting hairs. That's what I do. Like I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. This is we are talking about, minor differences and much better, for the most part, much better machines. The only real consistent problem I have with any of those, and again, I think it comes down to the cartridge, is really the cartridge itself. The cartridge itself is a genius idea, but the simple fact that the kind of the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, or at least maybe everybody's just getting used to, and I just can't, is the fact that they do not connect. And that lack of connection causes a lot of problems, some that can be overcome, some that can be dealt with. All of it can be dealt with. But I do find that I get a lot of weird stray lines. I'm like, oh, that's a cool like angle on that curve. It looks cool, but I sure didn't mean to do it. And it's because if you look at them close, and I'd really get down where I measure my throw. I've got like an actual microscope with a light on it. And I get down there and measure everything, and I'll run the machine to make sure the throw is doing everything right. And you can see with all of the cartridges, all of the brands that I've used, and I think I've gone through 4, maybe 5 brands so far, and they stutter and they move. And just the same, if you grab the end of it and you wiggle it back and forth, it moves. And that's what the tension of the skin does. When it stabs and it pulls to the side and we're moving with it, it bends and pulls that thing with it. And that's why we have so many line issues. There's some ergonomic issues, and that's kind of what I've got here. You can see this rig I was making with my friend Rory that used to work with me at Guru. And we're working on some of them. It actually helps quite a bit because the physical ergonomic problems with the pen style machine, it seems like a pen machine would be better, but the fulcrum of the L shape in a machine is actually what stabilizes your hand, makes it where you can relax your hand. You don't get carpal tunnel because you don't have to like use the claw grip and do all the stuff that ends up being really bad for you. We need to find a way to bring that back. I'm actually going to take these up. I've been using them for a while now, and they are amazing. It really makes a big difference. And I was going to go up and talk to Franco, and my hope is that, I don't know why he would listen to me, just random, unsolicited advice guy. But I would hope that Franco, being in a position where he makes really good machines, he really seems to actually care about the details and the little things that he's doing. But he's not just making machines, he's making cartridges, and he's making good ones, or at least sort of good with these. And he's in a position where if you wanted to change the linkage and fix that elephant in the room problem that, honestly, I don't think this whole setup we're using is ever going to really evolve that high-end stuff until somebody fixes that. The simple fact that I'm any size liner I'm moving, especially in the fine, it's really obvious on the fine lines. It's making the same movement on big lines. It just, the line's so big it swallows it up and you don't see it. but it gets these crooked wobbles. Somebody's skin changes texture and spots, which they all do. You get a random tough spot or something like that. You going around a curve or arc, even if you've got great technique and you're keeping your machine really nice and parallel and, perpendicular, and everything is right, it still will catch a little something and just get a little wiggle, or you'll go back in the same spot and it'll just decide, no, I'm going to go slightly to the side of the other line I just did. Now, rather than reinforcing a slightly light line, now I have a double width light line, stuff like that. And it's, again, we're nitpicking. You can make good looking tattoos and good looking lines with these. It does require more going back. But again, if we're talking about that high end of that scale, the 8, 9, 10 on the technical lining scale, single pass, easy lines, that's the unicorn. That's what everybody wants to get. That's the, that's what we're all hopefully aiming for. And I don't think will happen unless somebody can find a way to make the little plunger actually, have some kind of a claw or a cup that actually fully attaches enough to where it can't allow that side to side movement. I just don't think it's going to happen. And also a big part of it is the stuttering, machine change speeds, and sometimes where they just get where they're kind of off with each other. And there's obviously, the cartridges aren't uniform, so that can be problems in a number of areas. It could be brands, it could be the way these links up, whatever. A lot of things.
I remember having this conversation with Carson whenever he was designing the cam system and how much you can ramp those cams, because like you're saying, like you ramp the cam to an extent that a cartridge literally is like sprung off like a trampoline and loses the cam altogether, which obviously will amplify the issue you're talking about, and then it lands back on the cam and gets this kind of bounce, and so you end up with a lot of chatter in there, and it's impossible nearly for him, or not nearly, it's completely impossible for him to plan for that, because all these cartridges are coming in bulk with tons of different plastics, tons of different mechanisms that make them work, and all you can say if you're building a machine and trying to make it as best it can be is like buy the highest quality cartridges you have. It would be nice if there was some type of a tensioning measurement on cartridges, whether it's membrane or rubber band or whatever else, where you say, like, this is a spring tension gauge, this is a 5
for
tension.
Coils. There's no reason we can't just use the same kind as a spring tension gauge and figure it out. It does need to be standardized. The problem is everybody's just doing their own thing and they're figuring it out, which is fine. They're figuring it out a lot more than I am. But I think all of us who are kind of in the soup right now, we can see that's it. That's where things get fixed. That's where things elevate to the next level. And the guy, whether that's Carson or Franco or whoever else wants to actually put in the work to get that, they are going to own the landscape. Whoever does that makes all the other brands obsolete. So that it would be their motivation, I would think, to do that. But I'm not saying that's easy, or, there's obviously a lot of problems involved. But sitting here watching it, we can see that's it. That's the goalpost that needs to, and eventually somebody's going to figure out how to hit. And when they do, everybody's lives are going to get easier,
But my question would be, are there any cartridges manufactured in the United States that we have control over? Or are we just buying the highest quality cartridges and rebranding them from other places? I think that Black Claw is making theirs.
I'm pretty sure that right? Da Vinci he's done his too. I don't 100% know, but I've watched a lot of his stuff where he talks about it and some of the work he's put into designing them and having them made. And I'm fairly sure that I know that they're at least his. I don't know for sure if they're being made here or what parts are what, but I do know that it's not just a rebranding thing. He's very much doing his own thing, or I should say they. It's not just Franco, but yeah, they're very much doing their own thing up there, and that's why I kind of want to talk to them. Not only because I have actually been surprised by and a big fan of these machines, especially with these when you get the nice. They offer the aluminum grips, as the 2-inch and the 1.75, and that fixes some of the ergonomic issues. I have basically a number of big issues I had with, what's holding back the pen machine. One of them is that it actually is missing the weight. The machine is strong enough to push itself away from the skin in your hand. So your hand has to compensate by pushing back. Now you have all these other forces going different directions, and a machine that's also not linked at the point of contact. So of course, yeah, it buckles and things wiggle and there's a lot of crazy shit going on. There's no way there's not going to be.
Let me ask this, because as we're talking about this, I'm remembering that this isn't the first time we've had not you and I've had this conversation, but this isn't a new conversation. When I first
I hope
started
I'm not repeating myself too much here.
Say it again.
I hope I'm
Sorry,
not
I lost you.
repeating myself too much on these.
No, you're not. I just, as we're talking, I'm getting flashbacks of whenever I was an apprentice and I started buying my own tubes and needles. And I remember being told, diamond tip tubes are for true professionals and round tip tubes are for beginners, because a round tip tube, the needle is allowed to slip around and get wacky. In the diamond tip, you've learned how to keep the needle in the bottom of the tube, riding the bottom of the tube, so you're able to approach the tattoo from a specific direction. And so I don't know, after I tattooed with coils for years, I don't know that I believe that. I don't know that I ever noticed a difference, but it was a conversation that was being had, nearly or probably over 30 years ago.
I definitely noticed the difference on those. I was lucky enough. The first shop I was at, we had a machine shop or some metalworking stuff in the back, and we could resolder, put some stuff together, making our own jewelry and needles and everything from scratch back then. And I noticed as we were putting tubes together, I hear some of that, and me being the obsessive attention to detail guy that I am, I had to test it. So I did a lot of testing back and forth, mostly geometric stuff. And I did find that there was a big difference, not noticeable. And again, it comes down to what we were talking about earlier, is training your eye. It all has to do with the level of scrutiny you're willing to put towards something. Sometimes, there's clearly a line in anything where you're just making trouble for yourself. It's not worth agonizing over this or that, or it doesn't make a real noticeable difference. But really, until you test, you don't know which of those things are, I found something really useful that we should be paying attention to, or that. And I felt like that was one of them. Years later, after, I was, I think, in some ways later getting rid of metal tubes, but not entirely, because I found a different way to do them, where you have a plastic, disposable, or the nylon tips, but still have the metal grip for balancing. And what got me to change that was even really before cartridges were big, was that that's where all the rubbing on the metal was coming from. If people had a round liner, they would have 3-4 rubber bands around the liner. It's like, it doesn't move. Yeah, it's because you got so much back tension on that thing that you're basically scraping and cutting through the metal. Even if it starts off as a round tip tube, it's going to be a diamond in the end, because you cut a groove into it, and all that extra metal goes into somebody's skin. That's why whites used to turn gray when you tattoo with them. It wasn't the ink, it was the rubbing of the metal going into the white ink, which is disgusting. So, yeah. Yeah, so that was a big part of me doing that, is just trying to, not just have better, safer materials for my clients, but, better, more accurate work. So I felt like that was important. I feel like with the cartridge setups, I don't think they need to have any kind of back pressure, but something to stabilize the bar is all that it really needs. I feel like most of them, they vary a lot, and it really depends on how thick your inks are and how you use them, how effective you think the spaces are in them. But having a little space all the way around it seems to be mostly good. When I get, especially with this one, I found, actually it's one of the few that I'm using that's not from Da Vinci. There's an 18-round, textured 18-round liners that I've been using that are magic. And they just like that, the tube tip on it is so good for black line that I can, even with a big 18, I can draw a bunch of ink in there, and I swear I can get like 2 feet worth of black solid line done without affecting the quality, without having to re-dip anywhere. It does a really good job of that. So I think that most of these tubes, they have the potential to be much better tools in every way, but everybody's got to kind of stop ignoring that problem. When I say everybody, I mean manufacturers. Obviously, we work with the best tools we can get, and that's about all we can do right now. But I really wish the manufacturers would understand that and find a way to work with it. If they would standardize the stuff across the board, it would help. If they would talk to each other a little bit. I know it's not cheap or easy, but obviously we're in a position where all these things are constantly in flux and changing anyway. So if your stuff's going to keep changing, maybe you guys should have a powwow and decide to at least make a couple of things standard, so that everybody's life doesn't have to be chaos in the meantime, But yeah, cartridges, they got issues. That wasn't intended. I wasn't intending on that being the topic today, because I actually do really like them.
I love it, and I know I never know what direction we're going to go. I tell you what, as we talk about this, one thing that I would love to do, I've been wanting to do more series with people who love to deep dive on different things. And I mentioned to you that Russ Abbott and I are doing a series, and it's going to be on technology. not necessarily the type of technology we're talking about, but just technology in general.
If you want, we can put this aside and save it for that then, because I did want to show you these because they are kind of amazing, the rigs for these, but we can save that for another one as well.
I'd love to. But what I was going to mention, just to finish my thought, is that I'd love to, whenever you get to Denver, when you get settled in, I'd love to come out and do maybe a 6 or 8 part series where we just focused on a specific thing. Like you just mentioned textured needles. A couple of minutes ago, you mentioned something about using the Musotoku, and I'm curious about your thoughts on continuous amps versus starting amps and whether it even makes a difference. Did you ever see an episode that I did maybe a year or two ago where I got a lot of not negative feedback, just feedback with counterpoints, which I appreciated, where I tested kind of this idea of continuous amps versus starting amps, where the Musotoku is something like 4 continuous amps, whereas the comparably priced Critical is 1 continuous amp. And I was running it at a very slow cut, trying to get that peppered, like you were talking about, that kind of whip stipple effect. And I got such a cleaner effect off of the 4 continuous amp Musotoku than I did off of the Critical. And I got a lot of feedback on that was essentially, those machines are drawing milliamps. No machine is drawing even a single amp. So what you're saying is completely wrong. And I appreciate that perspective, but I experienced the difference in the feel. And so that type of stuff I'd love to go deeper into. Let me just ask what your thoughts on that. So what I was going to say, I'm sure we had to clip this in, so we'll just let people know that we had a dead battery. What I was going to say is the only time that I noticed that continuous amp difference from the Critical to the Musotoku is because I was running at about 2.8 to 3.2 amps for that with the Dan Cuban for that really kind of smooth, whipped, stippled stuff. If I'm running it at 5 amps or 5 volts or above, I can't tell any difference at all.
Yeah, and I rarely run that low. I have a couple of machines where, like, if I want a really peppery texture on something, on some black and gray, there's a few different ways I'll go at it. Only one of them do I really run that low, and that's if it's one of the Cubans, or I have some of the old those Australian swatch drives that I like to run really low for some stuff. They get some really nice effects when you do that, but it's not something I do enough of that I can say that that's a big important part of my setup. I appreciate those guys. I like what they made, but yeah. That's the stable part. I don't really mess with changing too much else. I worry more about the ergonomics on the machine, stuff like that. This one here, I don't know if you've seen on the lower part of the fingers. We're obviously rigging things and drilling and making stuff out of other metal parts we could find, but this makes it where, like, when you're working on something flat, you can actually get your finger lower. That's one of the ergonomic problems that a lot of pen style machines have, and why a lot of people struggle with their lining with them. It's not just the other stuff we talked about with the cartridges before, but basically just the ergonomics are bad on that. Like, the further your hand is away from what you're tattooing, the more and wobble and wiggle can happen. And good technique, the way I learned really good technique, you want to keep the machine almost entirely perpendicular no matter where it's at on the body, unless you're trying to do some fancy trick. It needs to be that way almost all the time. And it's stable because you got a tripod. You got one finger here, one here, and then the palm of your hand like this. And that way, if anything moves or changes or anything, you can still get the finest of straight lines and curves and everything. And when the cartridges get really long and far away from the tip, you can't do that. People aren't able to, touch this finger down and get that really stable like that. That's why it's got the little notch here, so you can turn it and move it, and you can, adjust your hand on it and that kind of thing without it kind of going anywhere or feeling like it's going to fall out of your hand. But this part gets your finger down. Hold it
close
low.
One more time. I'm showing my age. I had to put my glasses on. I wasn't looking at glass. I wasn't wearing glasses the first time. Hold it as close as you can get. One more time. Okay. And
it's mostly just got this back end on it, to where, like, it doesn't affect your field of view. If I'm looking down, it doesn't get in the way of anything this way. It's not blocking my view or the light. But in the back, it allows my finger to get down lower to the actual skin surface, but it's still far enough away from the actual point that, the ink doesn't bleed onto your finger or any of that stuff. So you're using that guide finger, which, as we know, not only makes it more stable, but it actually makes lines hurt a lot less, like a lot less. If you have your finger touching right at the point of contact, it's just like pulling hairs. You pull 1 or 2 hairs, it hurts a lot. You pull a whole bunch at once, it doesn't hurt that bad. Lines are the same way. People have good technique and they have that. It hurts less. You get stuff done faster. You get a lot more one-pass lines really well. but you got to be able to shorten that gap, or at least a finger. You got to be able to get your finger down the back of the grip. This long distance between the lower part these have and the actual skin is, it's a lot further than it used to be. You know, a lot of times, I don't know how you did it, but most people I know with metal tubes, when we would assemble them, most people would push the grip down as far as they can, closer to the skin, because that would allow you to get a really stable, you know, hold on it. So that's kind of what that's mimicking right there. Some of this in the back is just so we can get that. And, you know, the coolest thing that could possibly happen if Franco could, you know, figure it out, since he's got all the stuff at hand, would be if you can make like an elbow, like a 90-degree angle. So the battery sits on the back, but it does this little turn in the back, just enough to where it does like the old machines where it would actually balance over your hand so you don't have to hold it really hard. Just enough weight. That's how the Cubans are. I mean, they're light enough on the actual frame and motor that it's not weighing the hand down in a really bad way. It doesn't feel like a really old school like iron frame machine, but it's just enough weight to stabilize everything. So when there's any wiggles in the skin or anything else, it doesn't go anywhere. And you also don't have to grip it super hard. So, you know, even old timers and people who've been, you know, working really long days, you don't have a lot of carpal tunnel issues. It solves so many problems at once that, you know, capital L-shaped ergonomic design is kind of the optical design. So the pen shapes look great, but if it just, you take a little weight and kick it over the back, man, better machine, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up, because a big push was to get everything in a straight line, you know, for the batteries to kind of get like everything to run straight, so it felt more like an
I feel like
actual
so
pen.
much of this evolution has been necessary and needing to come along, and it's oftentimes being done by people who are not the most equipped in the way of, like, they don't have fancy labs, they don't have fancy really good, you know, $1 million machine shops and, you know, ways to figure out a lot of the stuff. So it's people who are just doing the best with what they have to figure it out. So there's a lot of awkward steps, and in some ways it feels like one of those sort of like tail wags the dog scenarios, you know what I mean? There are a lot of things, and how we ended up with cartridges, and again, needles. That's another big one I get into. Needle, people using bug pens and tight needle groupings and all that stuff. A lot of that comes from the fact that most people who were doing this, the tools that were first doing this stuff, that were good, that were interesting, that were new and fun, were ones that worked better for what people needed for portrait style tattooing. And you know, that middle range, that the type of force and stuff they need to do that kind of tattooing was suited to that, but not for traditional stuff, not for you know, so many other standard kinds of tattooing and stuff. So basically that's where all the money was. Everybody chased the money. Manufacturers are making what sells, makes sense. And then now we've got it where everybody is using tools that are optimized for portrait artists, and we're trying to use them for other stuff. So I'm not saying we should take that away from them, but there does need, if they want to reach that part of the market and let tattooing get the highest quality stuff available, those gaps need to be shored up a little bit, you know? So stuff like this, you can make this in one piece, or Franco or somebody could. I can't, but somebody could make these, you know, put them out full time. But really, that's all it takes. They're autoclavable, the same as the other ones, and you know, I wrap them and bag them and do all the stuff just like anybody else does with them. But they're, I've been using that with those set up on them for about maybe 3 weeks or a month now, and oh my God, that is a major game changer in the line quality. It really is a big one. So.
And remind me, I must have missed it. It came from where? It's your
yeah. Well, yeah, I've been basically tweaking on stuff, and then my friend Rory I used to work with has just a really good setup. He's got a really nice shop with a lot of metalwork and stuff in it, and he's got more know-how when it comes to. We haven't had to in this case. We've had a lot of projects. There's some things that involve a little bit of welding and, you know, other little things we want to tweak and change and that kind of stuff. So it's been invaluable to have him around because he's so good with that stuff. There was one note, we kind of brushed on needles a little bit. I want to tell one thing that most young artists can do, younger artists, if you're worried about lines and line quality and you're not trying to do fine line or portrait work, change the needle groupings that you're buying. Change, you know, even if you're using all cartridges, it's really hard to find cartridges that are medium taper and not long taper, but it's important. Change the cartridges that have the tight groupings to the ones that have the more medium groupings. Most of the liners that are, you know, they're called shaders in most cases. They're sold as shaders, but they're exactly the same as a standard straight liner and what they used to be. And that drastically affects the quality. And because, you know, most people think, oh, tighter means better. Tighter means tighter lines. It doesn't, because those points get closer together, and they not only do they do more damage because they're grouped together and the needles can't puncture the skin properly, but they're all coming in at slightly, pointed angles that change the way it affects everything. And you get more tearing, bleeding, less standard. When a single dot punctures the skin, the dot that it leaves behind when you're looking from the top down, the eye looking from the top down on the hole, you don't just see this tiny, pin of a dot. It actually blooms out a tiny little bit, and that's why having a little bit of open space, a liner setup, you look straight at it, it's more like that, a little space around each one that allows that little spot to bloom out, and that's how you get a perfect line. There is a kind of a sweet spot in the middle. It's not near blowing out, but it's not just this scrape mark either, where it's barely a pinprick. And that's what a medium taper needle will do a lot better. The slightly thicker needle is going to leave a slightly thicker dot, but it's got to do just the tiniest bit of extra damage to that end point of the stroke, and that slightly pulling to the side, slightly wider bit is actually what allows the ink to get in there. That's why bug pins they're good for shading, but in a way they're like training wheels for shading. You're not allowing your technique. You're not saying I'm getting the exact amount of gray dots or black dots in the right place to get the gray field that I need. You're allowing the tools to do half as good of a job to basically have the control that you don't quite have on your technique. You know what I mean? It's kind of like training wheels for a bike. So you can do that. It's not, wrong, but it's also essentially causing more damage. The ratio of damage to the amount of ink left behind in the skin is, something we're always trying to fix. You obviously want to be on the right side of that. As much ink in the skin as we can for as little damage as we can, so it heals well and doesn't bleed it back out and all the other problems. So that does basically a deeper puncture. It's thinner. It doesn't pull the ink all the way down to the bottom of the hole that it makes. And part of that is because it's thinner and it doesn't pull to the side as much. But part of it is also because the taper, long taper, it's a curve like this. It's more like a bug pin. It's a rounded curve. And when the other ones, it's almost more like a pencil tip. Or I guess in this case like the pen. And it's it's basically straight, and then it's got the angle. And that's how a medium taper is. And that little corner, when it goes in the skin, that's what forces the air in, or liquid that's pooling around the top of the skin. That's what forces everything in the vacuum. So having that shoulder, that corner, is actually more effective. For every puncture, you're going to leave more ink in and deeper in every puncture made. So less damage, more ink. So that is where the rubber meets the road for the artist. If you want a thinner line, you should move down a size. Don't get a tighter liner. Don't get if you want a 9 line, you want a tight 9. You don't want a tight 9. You want a 7. You want a 7 that's perfectly straight. Then all the needles are perfectly straight in line, a little space where you can see around them in there. And if your machine is perpendicular, you're doing a good line, you've got the skin stretched, everything's going right, and the technique is right, then that basically all those puncture marks are going to puncture well enough to where it fills the tiny little spaces in between them and you have a perfectly filled line. That's good technique. That's what makes it work. So it's, if you go too light, you go with bug pins, you go with something that's too tight in the tip. I'm not saying you can't get those things, but you're going to have to work at it harder. And by working at it harder, you're going to get more scabbing, bleeding, blowouts, leaning in different directions. You're just going to have to fight it so much more. And when you do it the other way, it's hard to learn at first, for new artists. But when they do, and it hits that, how it was. I'm sure you remember when you first started being able to get good one-pass lines, times they happen. Oh my God, it feels so good. It's like magic. It's like, holy shit, you want to stop everybody what they're doing to show them what you did at the shop. It's so good. And that's what will happen. But it has to be that. You need medium tapers. They're not sold very often anymore. Cartridges are, because, everything's sort of skewed towards portrait style tattooing. It is really hard to find people that make cartridges with, straight groupings and with, just medium taper needles. I really had to do a lot of looking for every one of these.
I'm sure that we come from the same era, and it took me a long time to understand the verbiage of needle when I started buying pre-made needles, because for the first 10 years of my career, we made our needles for that day. And I didn't know what a power liner or a tight liner or whatever it was. I just learned over time that if I accidentally had too much solder on the needle grouping and it sucked too far down the needles, that needle was no good anymore, because it was like a razor blade on the skin. And so I would either go through and try to melt it and open it back up, or normally I would just throw it away and do it again. Likewise, I would, when I tried to put the needle, after the needle grouping was soldered in that jig and I tried to move it to the jig to put it on the bar, if I ended up with any kind of a little blob where the needle met the bar, I knew it was going to spit ink, and then that wasn't going to work. And so you do that because you would try to work with needles and then they would ruin your tattoos. But I didn't understand the verbiage. I didn't know, whenever people started making what they called a power liner or a round shader. And to your point, what I realized is all I use are round shaders. That's what I line with. I'll line with a 7 round shader or a 9 round shader.
That's the problem. Yeah. Once everybody started selling stuff, they are all selling them by the terms that are popular. It's not even about what they think is right. It's like, oh, these are what people are asking me for, and they're paying, so this is what we make, and this is what we print on the box. And so terminology is just getting thrown around and mixed around everywhere. So that's why I try to describe the needle now. I'm like, you know what? I'll describe it. I'll show you. I'll draw you a picture, but I don't want to use the terms because there's selling points. And too often, again, it's the tail wags the dog sort of scenario. It's the manufacturers who are, to no fault of their own, they're making stuff, because they're in business and people have to buy it and that has to work. But they're very often catering towards things that end up being, fun verbiage, fun terminology. Oh, a power liner sounds more powerful. We'll get that. And who knows? You could have like one of the needles sticking sideways, and that's a super power liner. And you sell that, and and then everybody will be buying that, and then now that's the standard needle. Things can get asked backwards if somebody at some point doesn't have conversations about exactly what they need and bring it back to center. So that's why I like to try to do that. Every once in a while, I was like, I know most people probably know this stuff, but let me say it again, and hopefully have patience with me if I'm repeating myself, because it's important.
People don't, because they ask the question all the time. And most of the people that watch this show came up with a power liner already in existence. And if you see the term power liner, you assume it's going to make a big, bold, powerful Sharpie line, and you're like, I don't even know what it means, but it sounds like
I don't know what it means. I mean, I've heard it, but I also, because I've heard so many terms thrown around, I just categorically ignore it. If I hear it, I just let it bounce off me and go away, because I don't care. I'll see what it is. And when I'm looking at, cartridges especially, I'm having a hard time finding the ones that look right. When I'm buying pre-made needle on bar, I'm having an easier time, but more often than not, like most of them, the needle on bar companies would, at least for a while, have a series of ones they do that's super tight, and a series of ones that are kind of straight and like maybe somewhat, they call them their traditional line or something like that. And then they'd have ones that are really open, they call them shaders. And then those can all start to mix around and change and whatever. But the straight, basically where they basically are all the same at the back end as they are at the front end, that's what makes the best lines. It's just the biology. We're talking about, the skin at that point, the facts of what comes back and what stays over years is what's determining that. It's not about, anybody's style or their preference or anything else. So it takes some of the guesswork out for some of these other guys too, because they can probably simplify their arsenal. They don't have to buy so many different types of stuff. They can just get all you really need for lining is really just maybe 5 different sizes of needles, and that's it. And every single time you want to do something different, just go up or down a size. Nobody needs a tight 9, 11, any of that kind of stuff, because at a certain point they get so tight together, you're basically, it's just like trying to tattoo somebody with a roofing nail. It hits the skin and nothing punctures or it just tears. It just starts really screwing things up, and then they're like, man, this fucking machine sucks. They're like, it's real easy to blame the wrong things when no fault of their own, but very often people are looking at the material or the machine or the needles when they should be looking at their technique. And the technique is, it doesn't come easy. Most of us had to figure out the hard way. It's great that some people are out there sharing information. It's nobody's fault if they don't know any better, but it does help people. Again, it comes back to, like in the beginning, we talked about that, the fork in the road, the crossroads. What happens when you hit a problem somewhere? Are you going to just decide, that it's the easy out, the fuck it thing, which is, oh, my machines are bad, or that's dumb, or I don't need to do that thing that seems like it'd be hard to learn how to do. Or you can really stop, take a minute to pause at that fork in the road, really figure out what's happening in each direction before you make up your mind, But that's a big one. If people spent a little more time focusing on technique rather than that, a good artist can make almost any terrible machine work pretty well and get good stuff out of it. But that's because you have not just a technique, but several techniques. So if this thing isn't happening, I've got a backup. I've got something on the bench behind that. You know, I've got a few tools, a few ways of problem solving this problem. So.
Hey, thanks again to you. Thanks again to Cooper. Cooper's always awesome to have on the show. I hope you got something out of that episode. Don't forget, Paradise Tattoo Gathering. Come join us out there. The link is in the description below. Also, I wanted to pitch our Inside Fireside Tattoo Club. You've probably heard me talk about it by now, but we do a lot of fun stuff on our Discord server. We do episodes kind of like this, but with the entire group, the entire Inside Fireside Club. So we'll have someone on a Discord or a Zoom conversation. We'll go through their portfolio. They'll talk about their process, about machines they're using, needles they're using, and everyone gets to participate and ask questions. So it's kind of like a podcast with you asking the questions or contributing kind of alongside me. That's just one of the things that we do on the Tattoo Club. It is a lot of fun. We draw together, we play together, have a good time. So check it out if you're interested. We would love to have you be a part. What else? I think I've said it all. Thank you, as always, for supporting the Fireside Tattoo Network, and I'll see you in the next episode.